Okay, it looks like we're just about ready to start. Thanks everybody for your patience. And Pete, if I may, I'm going to be your proxy and call the meeting to order. And our first item of business is the treasurer's report, including the audit. Do you have any comments, Pete, before we start? I take that as a no. I'll take your silence as consent. Great. Doug, why don't you start? Give us a brief update on where the school stands fiscally, and I can share the financials, and then turn it over to Gus and James.
All right. So we're going to be pretty brief with our September report. There's no big changes happening. That's on what page is that? Oh, page 3, right? For state grant funding, which is our per pupil, right now our year to date is down $96,000. That just have to do with us settling with enrollment. We budgeted for 435 students. Right now we got about 423 students. For SPED students that we budgeted for the year was 55 high cost students. We are in the 70s, so we over enrolled. So we should see this number either flatten out or we should see a surplus there. The next line item I'm going to point to is line 4200, which is our federal grants. It says year to date, we're down $23,000. That has to do with us not receiving our IED payment. We get that sporadically throughout the year. Last year, I think we got it in November. So anytime they see it, anytime they post it, we will post it to our account, but it's broken out for a 12-month period. So for our revenue, that's kind of, it's really no moving parts. It's the beginning of the year. So I'm going to point out some other items. That just has to do with us paying out some bonuses from FY20 from last year. We normally do it a little bit later. There were no testing. Bonuses have to do with testing, and since there was no testing, and we just paid them out slightly earlier than normal. And the last item I'm going to talk about on this page will be 7400, which is our marketing and recruitment. For the month of September and our year to date, we're over $23,000. That has to do with a payment for TFA. We have 8 TFA teachers working for our school, and we pay for a certain amount of years to have them come to our school, and it includes training to our teachers, and it's part of a membership. So that invoice was $29,000 for the 8 teachers for this school year. It's booked to September, so it shows as a surplus. It shows as an overage. So that's it for the budgets versus actuals. And I'm going to jump really quickly to our balance sheet, which says statement of financial position. Total amount of money that we had in our bank account for the month of September was $4.5 million, including other assets, receivables, and current assets. We have 4.8. That's pretty good. We do have some money in CDs. It's not yielding a large return. We are in the process of looking to see if we could put that money to use. As I conclude, I just want to point out our current liabilities. It says that we have $1.8 million in current liabilities. What that is the PPP money that we receive from the federal government. It should be forgiven. However, we are unclear of the terms and timing of it. So we keep it on our balance sheet, and as it is forgiven, we will either remove it or recognize it as revenue as that time comes. And that is my TED Talk. And now we're going to turn it over to Gus and James. Good morning, fellas.
Good morning, Doug. Thank you. Thanks. We'll try to go through this pretty quickly. This is our wrap up meeting, our audit wrap up meeting, and we circulated a wrap up letter. It says report to the Board of Trustees. I'm just going to go through it pretty quickly. I know some of it we've already discussed at our previous meeting, and some of the required communication we've discussed at our planning meeting. So if that's okay with everybody, and then we can go through the financial statement. James will get us through the financial statements and just hit on some highlights, if that's okay. So right now, the status of the audit, we're waiting for the signed representation letter. Once we get that signed representation letter, and we're also waiting for the two deficiencies that we identified and we spoke about at our last meeting. I believe we've gotten the corrective action plan for the two deficiencies around the credit cards and around the student files. So I pretty much, I don't think we've gotten the signing management representation letter, right?
That's correct. You don't have that.
Okay, once we get that, we can go final. The audit's due November 1st, and we'll be done with it. And the only other thing left is the 990, which we plan on getting out and doing by November 15th. So we've gotten the questionnaire back. Our tax people are in the middle of preparing, and that should be good to go. It'll be circulated to the board, and the board will be given about 5-6 days, whatever it may be, 4 or 5 days to look through it before we hit the button and file. That's where we're at right now. You know, as far as like some of the standard communication in that letter, it shows it lists our responsibilities, the responsibilities of management, the responsibilities of the board. It also lists some estimates that we've made, which are mostly around the useful life of assets, the allocation of functional expenses, and also the collectability of the receivables. And we listed some more sensitive disclosures, like the disclosure about the Paycheck Protection Program loan, which was received subsequently, some of the risks and uncertainties that charter schools are currently facing. We have that note on every single charter school that we do, all around enrollment, the possibility of lower enrollment, the possibility of, or the uncertainty of delays in the per pupil allocation or decreases in the per pupil allocation. So basically, you know, with the exception of the credit cards and student files, we really didn't have any other significant deficiencies or difficulties during the audit. We had no disagreements with management. We are independent of the audit, which we have to be. And those are all listed in that document. Now I think we all know what the deficiencies are. I don't want to get into it again, if that's okay. And hopefully that will be resolved next year. And included in this wrap-up memo is also again, we've discussed this at the planning meeting, is some of the new pronouncements that are coming up that were effective this year and that are coming up in future, which they don't really affect you guys all that much, or the school all that much. So I'm not going to really get into that either. And we did have, you know, we also listed an entry that we had to make around the credit cards, because at the time that there was issues with the credit cards, it was all being put into one general expense account. Doug had to go in and reallocate some of it once we got those receipts back. That's really a quick overview. I know I went pretty fast, so if you want me to explain anything, please let me know. I went fast because we've already talked about this at length at our previous meeting. So any questions on the overall audit process before we get into some of the numbers with James? We're good? Okay. James, do you want to take over and just go through the highlights of the financial statements?
So first couple of pages of the financial statements is just our opinion. As Gus mentioned, it's going to be a clean opinion. moving into the balance sheet, I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights from the statements, and if there's any questions, then just let me know, and I'll be happy to dig deeper into it. Or if any questions come up after, you can always feel free to email us. Starting with the balance sheet, we did have a $500,000 increase in cash, which is in line with the net income for the year of about $790,000, and is offset slightly by the $150,000 increase in receivables and a decrease in payables, which would negatively affect cash. Grants and contracts receivable is up about $150,000. That's from the state Senate aid, it's about $80,000, and the ESSER funding, which is about another $80,000. Those were, the state Senate aid was collected before year end last year, and the ESSER funding is new this year. Just one more thing on the balance sheet, property and equipment is up a little bit. The school spent money to purchase laptops for remote learning and also furniture and tech for some of the new classrooms. Moving on to the statement of activities, we had an overall increase in revenue of about 1.2 million. We can attribute that to an almost a little over $700,000 increase in regular student enrollment. We educated 30 more students this year, and we had an $800 increase in the per pupil allocation. And also we had a $400,000 increase in the SPED revenue. And we can attribute that to an increase in the students educated in the over 60% bucket, almost 23 more students we educated this year. And moving down to the expenses, we had overall a $700,000 increase in expenses, 740,000, excuse me. And we can attribute that mostly to additional staff hired. If you look at the statement of functional expenses, you can see that there's about 13 more employees that were brought on this year. So we had a $700,000 increase in salaries, corresponding increase in benefits and payroll taxes, about 170,000. And that was offset slightly by a $120,000 decrease in classroom and office supplies, which we can attribute to the remote learning and going remote during COVID. So the statement of cash flows is really just our reconciliation from the change in net assets to the change in cash. Just something that's new this year at the bottom of the statement of cash flows is a breakout of the cash and cash equivalents and restricted cash. That's new this year. So if you hold these statements up to last year's, that reconciliation at the bottom is not there. That's new this year. The notes, as Gus mentioned, a lot of them are rolled forward from last year, and just updated. But just a couple of things that are new is the COVID note. That's note 11, and also note 12 is the subsequent event note that discusses the receipt of the PPP loan. And any questions on the financial statements?
I think we're overall we're in a good position from the balance sheet perspective, financial position perspective. We have a decent amount of cash. Our current assets are a lot higher than our current liabilities, so we're in good shape. I think we're in good shape financially.
Gus, do you want to?
Gus and James, anybody have any questions for our accountants?
I know it's too early to talk about how schools are preparing for possible austerity if the state budget gets cut, but because you're looking at last year more than this year, but what trends are you seeing around the sector in terms of fiscal changes related to COVID?
Sure. I mean, most charter schools don't have a great perspective on what will happen, but they're not as optimistic. And I think from speaking to SUNY, from speaking to SED, it would seem like that the best that we can hope for is a status quo. I mean, forget about increases, whether it's cost of living increases in our per pupil. I think the best that we can hope for is a status quo. The state Senate funding will go away next year. Granted, it's not a significant number, but it is something. But what schools are doing they're really preparing a contingency plan. Most schools are doing a 5%, 10% cut in the PPA and how to handle it if that happens. So I think that's really wise. Some are doing Also some protections. Even though you're sitting with over $2.5 million of cash, before you know it, three to 5 years goes by really quick, and that could be diminished in a couple of years, depending on what your plan is. So I think the key here is to do some projections, to look forward 3 to 5 years, not just next year, and to also plan, and have a contingency plan ready if the per pupil allocation gets cut by 5-10%. So that way you're not struggling and you're not rushing to get something done. You already have a plan and you just implement that plan. So I think it's wise to do that going forward. I worry more about after 21, as well. So it's not just 2021. I think it's beyond 2021 also.
Naheem, can you and your colleagues on the Finance Committee work with Doug and whomever else is appropriate to follow the procedure, to follow the initiatives that Gus has just mentioned?
No problem. I think there are some things separately underway that already align, but it's not an issue to follow up and make sure that the ongoing plans align as well.
Thank you.
I think if nobody has any questions, I think we've fulfilled our, where the board's responsibility to reach out to the auditors. Then once we get the representation letter, we can start the final, just start issuing the final and email them to Doug.
Okay. So you will get that today. I wanted you guys to present to the board. Pete, I will be sending you over the letter, which you already have, but I'll send it to you in the e-doc so that you can sign and I can sign, and then we can pass that over to the auditors and then conclude. So just to reiterate, we should be able to meet our 990 filing and do not need an extension at this point, right?
Correct. I think we have, we do have the questionnaire. There'll be some back and forth between, but our tax people know that this has to go out by the 15th. So they'll work to try to get it out by and we will get it out by the 15th.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Gus and James. Appreciate your help.
Nice to see everybody.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi.
And
Steve, you want to proceed?
yes, I want to thank you, Doug, and to our Finance Committee for hearing those magic words, which are we are issuing a clean opinion. We know we have operational things that we have to address for next year, and those are included in the report too. And he didn't go into them because we discussed them in the last call. But yeah, the job one, aside from keeping the community safe for the board, is the fiduciary duty to the state. And we had a good year last year. So let's keep that going. Thank you. Okay, the next topic for discussion is just how things are going at the school. So I'm going to share my screen for the dashboard once again. Just a second. Enrollment is stable. It has not changed much since the last report to the board a month ago. We've lost a couple kids, added a couple of kids. It seems like there's much less activity than the usual this year. I thought there'd be more mobility because of COVID, but it feels like there's been fewer kids leaving and moving around that happened in the summer, late summer, and fewer kids enrolling. We are still doing recruitment. It's not been the major focus with all the stuff going on, but it has been a priority. That's enrollment. Any questions or any comments about that? Okay. With regard to attendance, it's up from the spring. It's not quite where we want it to be. And I just want to say a word about what attendance is, and then we can talk about what the data looks like and what our efforts are. Attendance for us is engaging in core instruction. So in remote learning, we have several blocks a day of core instruction. And then we have student work that has to be submitted. So if students do any of those things, they attend one of the core blocks, they provide the work, then they can be counted as present. We've focused on attending. We haven't looked back to incorporate kids who are absent from a session but who completed the work yet. Was something we can do in the future. We have a plan, a multifaceted plan to improve attendance. The first thing is getting all the Chromebooks out. There's been a major delay in getting the last round of Chromebooks. We still have about 100 students on our list of who have requested Chromebooks, and we have 100 machines arriving soon. By the end of this month, we expect we'll have almost all of those machines in after many delays and several rounds of purchasing and shifting where we're sourcing. We've given out over 300 since the spring. We have had a lot returned, people who left, and we've been giving those out again. We've had a lot of them broken and come back or getting repaired. Supply has been a real issue. And tech support has been an issue too, with families having trouble, getting up to speed on the Chromebook. So I think this is a factor. And once we see these last 100 go out, we should see an uptick in attendance. We've assigned every person a mentor this year, every student, which is new. We used to give mentors only to students who are in the lower attendance categories. Now every student has a mentor, and therefore there's someone who's there, even if they are normally having good attendance, to reach out and let them know that we notice they're absent, or where we encourage them because they've been perfect for X number of days. Just an example, one of my mentees yesterday didn't show up. Almost every day is there, wasn't at morning meeting, and I contacted mom and she said, oh, she was with her dad this weekend, he must have forgotten, so I'll make sure that she's off the afternoon sessions. That would never have happened before because we would have noticed this child who doesn't have any attendance issues wasn't present. Margaret, or anybody else on the school level, do you want to add anything about attendance? And then any questions on the board after that?
I think if I could add that I'm an attendance mentee this year for the first time, and it's been nice to be able to reach out to parents that I typically would not be reaching out to. And we've been able to be a support to these parents for just through COVID, and also if they have any immediate issues with their computers, and we're able to rectify those situations quickly, or as quickly as we can. But it's nice for relationship building in our school.
Maureen, are you also teaching remotely? And could you give us a brief description of how you feel about that?
Oh, well, you're asking the right person. I wrote to Ken the other day and said, I feel like I have the utopian job right now. I'm supporting the third grade in the mornings from 8:30 until 12. And it's been very positive to be able to support the teachers remotely and also the students. We have the ability to go into the breakout rooms. So not only are we in breakout rooms to meet the needs of our struggling students, but we've been taking the higher level students, and I've been taking specifically the math ones and following the math lesson plan, but then pushing them even further so that we can meet their needs as well. And then in the afternoons, I pull my 4 groups for my small academic intervention service groups. And these are students who are below reading level. And it's, again, been a great relationship builder and providing not only the support to the students, but also to the families who may be struggling. And like Steve had mentioned, we do have children who are moving around a lot. We have children going between mom, dad, aunt, uncle. One of them is actually in a daycare at times with another family member who runs a daycare. And it's been very nice to be able to have a better understanding of these students and from where they come so that we can meet them where they're at and then push them further. So I think my particular role is going very well. I enjoy being able to zoom into those groups for the third grade classrooms and also my own students in the afternoon. So I'm glad you asked that because I'm very pleased. I'm a parent also, and what I see Harlem Link doing is very different than what I'm seeing my own children getting at home here in 2 different districts. One is my stepson, and I applaud Harlem Link for its efforts to try to get our students to continue to be progressing despite what's going on in the world.
Thank you very much for those remarks.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Maureen and any of the other teachers or staff on the line. It's wonderful that we're at 80% attendance, but what does that feel like in terms of the depth and breadth of what in-school interaction is looking like in terms of instruction and attendance?
Maureen, do you want to take that or you want me to jump in? So are you talking about in terms of like the experience students are getting, contact with teachers, attention, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and how, you're in school for an entire day, but this is a very different.
Yeah.
So
I think,
understand the nuances.
Yeah. We've tried to set up a structure for remote learning that gets as much teacher interaction time as possible. And so we've basically made it so morning meeting is the only fully whole group thing. Anything else, you're going to be split into, at a minimum, 2 breakout rooms per class. In some classes, 3, because we've assigned, before we went into having the essential workers on site, we had an additional staff member in every class. So we were calling them a core teaching team member. And so we had 3 breakout rooms. So a class of 24 would be split into maybe 3 groups of 8. Or 2 groups of 12. And so the groups are much smaller. And that's for a couple of reasons. Some are for differentiation. And then the other piece is to just specifically have a smaller teacher-student ratio so that teachers can be hearing from students more. Less pressure on Zoom when you are unmuted to have 23 eyes on you, and to build a little community that way. So we're trying to make up for what we know is a lack of like seat time. It's going to become more complicated as more kids go on site because a lot of those supporting staff members, like we have Maureen here, we also have Miss Latanya, our dance teacher, who is supporting in a 5th grade room. And once those people start having to do other things, when we have more people on site, it's going to be harder to get that same ratio, which is kind of one of the challenges we've been facing in how we're going to roll this out. In terms of how attendance is playing out generally, it seems to be anecdotally, some classes are really strong, like in the mid 90s consistently, and they feel like full classrooms. And then we have a couple of classes that are a little bit smaller and they're in the high teens, low 20s. And so again, that plays out differently when you start breaking up classrooms. If you have breakout rooms of a class of 18, you have very small groups. And so obviously we want that attendance up. And then also on the flip side, if we're looking at silver linings, they're getting more interaction with their teachers in some of those rooms. So we've been trying our best. And then we have teachers like Maureen, who is scheduled as we ramped up. They don't need to be in there for math, but she was with the solo teacher and she's been staying in there for that extra 45 minutes to keep pulling small groups in math. And so we have people sort of going the extra mile. We're doing our best. I think it's a best case scenario right now in terms of what we can be doing online from where I'm sitting.
Thank you. Actually,
Thank you, Dan.
it's remarkable.
If I could just add in terms of, I agree with everything that Dan said. And I think that we're watching the attendance very carefully, particularly as we get closer to 100% of our kids having their tech needs met. That is definitely a really big factor in not being able to really look at what the authenticity of our remote attendance is. So we keep looking at that. And I just want to add in terms of, being a Harlem Link parent now, we have our little 5-year-old on small group instruction right now. She's in a classroom, in a small breakout room right now for literacy. We have another one over here in 5th grade and another small group. And, in terms of the parent experience, and I know Monica's on the call as well, the kids are on all day. They have breaks. So there's been strategic placement of breaks, but yeah, sorry, just totally, now she's like off task completely. Okay. All right, go back to Ms. Galumbo. But from 8:30 until 3 o'clock, they have their classes all day with their core instruction of literacy and math being mostly all in the morning when they're the freshest. So I have to say that as a parent, I feel like we've mimicked the day as closely as we possibly can remotely.
Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted to add to that. Hi, this is Monica, and what Margaret said is absolutely right, and even what Ms. Savelli pointed out as far as the structure that Harlem Kids has. But I've been telling you guys this since when this started. Like, no one else is doing this. But I do want to say just kudos to Ms. Williams, who is Morgan's third grade teacher, who I can hear the enthusiasm like coming through Morgan's headphones even sometimes, like how she's tried to engage the class. I am a little like sad that she's not in person with her because I love Ms. Williams. Anthony had her also in the third grade. But when I tell you the way she interacts with them, you know, even through Zoom, it's wonderful. And also Ms. Gregg and Marcellus and Miss Marcellus with Anthony as well. They really are doing their best to make this the best experience possible. So kudos to them. And all the special teachers as well. Thank you. Thank you. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Speaking of specials, Latanya, can you add a perspective of somebody who has been in those multiple roles, pushing in, being a support person in the core teaching team, and also doing a specials program?
So being a core teacher has been really interesting. Like, I went in open-minded. I'm learning a whole lot. I see most of the kids who weren't really engaged, and I'm speaking from a specialist point of view, they're more engaged. They are a bit more confident. I feel like they don't have the pressures of feeling like they have to participate. Now I see it's like freely. They want to be there. Again, I am a parent and my son's school is totally different. He logs on for like 30, 40 minutes, if that, and the teacher community is not there. In Harlem Link, there's a strong force of teacher community. Everyone is involved, whether you're a teacher or not. So I'm glad to have like this extra opportunity to learn. So it's been really interesting, beneficial, and fun.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a question that we could put in the chat, and I see Dan has responded to it. So it's been a little bit of a shift. A lot of them were new students still, and some of them were broken machines. So it's been a real variety. Have some students lost up to half an academic year of instruction. There's a very, very, very small group. I would say it's 5 or less of students who've been rarely engaged at all, who we really worry have lost all that time of instruction. For the most part, there's been sporadic like spurts for kids who are out, like the computer broke and now they're gone for a few weeks and we're not able to get them up and running. They've been attending otherwise. Or something shifted in the family. They moved away. They, they're staying with mom, went back to work, now they're with grandma, or so on, and now they're off. So things have shifted. It hasn't been like 20%, or even, it's more like 11, 12% at this point that are absent on a typical day. But those kids, they do vary who they are, although there are some who are consistently, we've struggled to engage. And so we didn't mention a social work team of 3 social workers is prioritizing the highest need cases, and they are their attendance mentors. And then we also have the next layer. We have a team of people. One of them, I believe, is on the call, April, who are case managers. And that's a new role for us this year. They're supporting the social work team. They're not social workers, but they are helping extend the social workers' time by providing a lot of the contact, communication, follow-up, and support. That doesn't necessarily need a trained social worker to accomplish, and they're working under the guidance of the social workers. There's about 100 kids in this category. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. Social workers can handle a caseload of 10
108, Steve, it's 184 kids.
184, okay. The list has grown a lot. It was originally around 100, and we've added kids. We have a good caseload for a social worker is 10 to 25. We've had over 30 for our social workers. they're not going to be able to handle half our school community, which is what, if you add up the social worker caseload and the caseworker caseload, it's almost half of our community. They wouldn't be able to handle that themselves. So the case manager role has been also really helpful, though it's just started. It took a while to get off the ground and train folks and organize ourselves. But I'm hopeful that this will also help attendant and social emotional supports in this really difficult time for families. Any last comments, and then we'll talk just to manage time. The rest of the agenda is a recap of the Ed Committee conversation, which is about the big picture of the school. We've touched on a little bit of it now, and then the future plans for where we are with blended learning and what's happening next. But any other questions about anything that we've talked about?
Yeah, please go on, Steve.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop the share here. So the Ed Committee talked about where we are as a school right now with reference to renewal, charter renewal. Renewal is 2 years away. The 2022-23, as weird as that is to say, school year is the renewal year. So if state tests come back, the 2021 state tests, no, 22 state tests will be the last test that count. I gotta make sure I get that right because I get confused as these numbers climb. Essentially, we don't know what's happening with state tests, so we need to show SUNY what we're doing to meet the renewal benchmarks and our accountability plan, regardless of having state test data. And we know that state test data is the main thing SUNY looks at when they look at renewal. Instead of trying to mimic the state tests, we are gathering our data and using our curriculum-based measures and our interim benchmark assessments to make a case about what our charter renewal standing is. So we submitted a report last month to SUNY, our annual accountability plan progress report. And without state test data, we made a case that we're doing this, this well in ELA and that well in math. We're doing better, we think, in ELA than in math based on our internal measures. We are also providing a lot of narrative description of what we're doing to support families and the community in the time of COVID, which we've heard from our authorizer will be a factor in renewal. So they know they won't have complete test scores for the schools that are getting renewed. Hearing about what we're doing to provide the supports and retain our students as they struggle, if they struggle, will be a factor as well. So at the next meeting, we're going to be looking at a set of data points ranging from the end of the school year last year to baseline data for this year, as well as a plan for what's coming with data for the rest of the year. We're also going to be looking at the executive committee level. We're looking at the renewal benchmarks as a whole and looking at some of the organizational capacity pieces that were brought up by SUNY at the last renewal to make sure that we're on track and we're addressing any concerns that we have. Brandy, are you on the call, and did you want to add anything? I don't see Brandy. I thought I saw her. Anybody else on the board want to chime in? Laura, you are on that call.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add. That was great. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Any questions about kind of where we stand or what academically and infrastructure-wise is happening right now at the school? Okay, great. What's next? So I feel like we're in this kind of hamster wheel of waiting for things to break one way or the other, like COVID to go away or everything to shut down. And we're all kind of stuck in that hamster wheel. It's encouraging that there has not been like massive breakouts around the city, but I know we're all holding our breaths. So at the school, we're taking it really, really slowly to bring people back on campus. As of today, we have 18 students on campus every day. They're doing their remote learning from school. So basically it's, as Laura said, it's a rec center at the school. And we're going to be starting to move toward what we originally planned to be blended learning by taking a different approach beginning next week with adding new students. So instead of being on campus 5 days a week, we're going to have a set of students coming in Monday through Thursday on a week-by-week rotating basis. So group A, we'll keep the same 18 kids who are there now. They'll stay 5 days a week, and those kind of slots will be set aside for essential workers and families that need that support all the time. And we'll be rotating in Group A will be, for illustration's sake, will be Monday through Thursday next week. Group B will be Monday through Thursday the following week, and then they'll flip. Group A will come back, Group B will stay home. And the reason for that is if we're all back together at full capacity of what hybrid or blended learning looks like, we're going to have room for most of our students, not all of them, using this arrangement where everybody will be able to come in 4 days a week, every other week for in-person instruction, and the rest of the time they'll be learning remote. And that's what Dan mentioned earlier. As we move toward a model like that, we're gonna have to spread ourselves more thinly and not be able to give all the attention to the remote learning rooms like we do now and do all that breakout. And the reality is when we get to that end point, if we ever get there, or if we don't go completely open again because things get resolved by the time we need to do that, every grade might look different because every grade is going to have a different mix of the number of students who opt in to come to blended. It's all in the parent control, and different arrangements of teachers who may have medical exemptions. We have some grades where we have multiple teachers with serious medical conditions or live with somebody who's immunocompromised. And we have other grades where most of the teachers are able to come in and do their work at school. So it's a variety of moving parts. It's a small group that's pulled it together. And I thought maybe Tyson, you could say a few words about the team that's on site taking care of the kids with learning support, because they've been really impressive so far.
Absolutely. We have a team of individuals who are coming in for different shifts during the day. What they're doing is they're providing a safe, nurturing environment for the students who are in the building, in terms of they're making sure the students are practicing social distance. They are also checking in with students to making sure that that work is being completed. And they're really supporting students with their social and emotional needs as well. So the staff that's here, they are eager to jump in and support our school the best way they can.
So we know what the next few weeks look like. We don't know what's happening beyond then because we're watching the data really carefully. We're watching to see how many families are engaging with us and saying, I need my child to come in, I want my child to come in. As we've talked about in this forum and others, there's still a lot of concern and fear from families. And I don't think that's going to abate until we see a real long span of time pass between the summer and not being a lot of breakouts. If I can just go on my soapbox for a moment, what I've been reading is we see parts of the country that were not affected in the spring as much now getting impacted. And the concern I'm hearing from scientists that I'm reading are now we're seeing a huge increase in cases in places like the Midwest and even in New Jersey. And in a month's time, we're going to see hospitalizations. And then a month later, we're going to see a lot of people dying in those places. That's sort of the time span. So it's not like the spikes happen overnight and then you feel the full impact of it. And I think we all understand that from the spring. There was a huge increase and a huge spike, but it went on and on and on and got worse and worse and worse before it got better. So I don't feel like there's a rush to re-enter the building. I do think it has been safe and it has been effective, not just at our school, but around the city. I think that the measures have been helpful, and having very, very few kids has been a major factor in that. So questions, comments from staff or board members?
Steve, do you have a rough estimate of how many parents are going to opt out of participation in in-house learning?
I think there's no way to estimate right now because I think it changes day to day. I mean, we've had some families, for example, who've been clamoring to come back because they need help. And, we've been scratching our heads like, how can we make room for this child? And then we learn that one child doesn't need the support after all. And so we can finally call this parent, let's call her R, like, your child's got to sleep. No, thank you. I'm going to decline it anyway. So, I think it shifts frequently. We don't have complete data. Most of our families did not respond to our surveys over the summer, and we defaulted them to remote learning because of the reasons we described. And in successive rounds, we have not heard an outcry. But there have been parents who spoke up and said, "Hey, I want my kid there," and then I'm not going to come after all. So it's hard to say. And like I said, it's going to continue to shift up and down. Nobody feels certain about where we stand right now.
I would just add that that kind of mimics what's happening just across the DOE as well. When we put a survey out in the spring, there were actually more families looking to do blended, but as we move into the fall and winter, that number is shifting. So now I think we're at 54% of families are opting for full remote. So it's starting to tilt the other way.
The school next door, we've had good communication with them since the start of the year, and their numbers have decreased since school opened. So more families came in September than are there now. They've stopped coming. I'm not sure why, because it feels like it's been a positive experience, but they're not coming.
I just have a quick question. So I know like last meeting we were talking about the ventilation and like the janitor and collaborating with them. So how's that been going in terms of like having ventilation that's up to par with what the city is demanding?
So Laura, you can say more about the citywide effort, but I understand, I mean, our building, I feel a lot better about where we stand than we did a month ago. On the citywide, I understand there is a new metric that they're now rolling out across the city for measuring the rate of turnover and the amount of carbon dioxide in rooms. We haven't seen that in our building yet, but in our building, the week before we opened or started bringing kids back, this custodian had scheduled to finish a lot of repairs so that every fan and every blower, whatever they're called, all the motors were operational, which they had not been all operational. They are now all operational. So they've addressed all the ventilation issues. The only concern now is the design of the building. And that's true in many places across the city. As I told our school management team, I'm encouraged. I know it's early still, because like I said, this can take months to develop, but we're not seeing across the city these massive spikes. So all these old buildings where open a window have not led to massive problems. At the same time, we're not in the winter yet. We don't know what the effect the heating system will have on ventilation. In theory, it'll blow more air around. That'll be helpful. But people may be tempted to keep more windows closed, which will not be helpful. So right now we keep doors open, we keep windows open. It gets chilly, but the air does feel like it's circulating. It doesn't feel like we're in a container.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
Laura,
do you have information about the new? I saw
not too much, but I can certainly do some digging and send it to the group.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Okay, Steve, what you got next?
Is it too early for a margarita? That's it. That's all I've got.
This is it's ridiculous to say, but this is a difficult time, and from what I've heard, I'm very impressed with both in this meeting and our executive committee meetings. I'm very impressed with what you've been able to do. I'm particularly impressed by the testimony of several members of the faculty and staff who have children in other schools, and we seem to be doing better than the schools their children are in. Not that this is a competitive race, but it does complement your team, you and your team. That we seem to be exceeding the norm here, and I'm very gratified by that. And I thank you very much for it. Does anyone else have any comments before we close? Were there any things that had to be voted on, Steve?
No, nothing to vote on. We have to accept the audit, which we did by listening.
Yeah.
I just want to add that.
No leftover minutes or something from
No. I think the sector as a whole, the charter sector, there's a lot of creativity around. And I do think that for the most part, the charters have focused on safety and put safety first, and then we're accountable for instruction. So we all feel that renewal clock ticking. So we've learned from colleagues too, and we've seen other schools do maybe not the same approach, but different versions of the approach that, we're going to take it slow and take care of. We have some charters that are not opening at all until January. They just said that, and that's the way they're going to be. And they're trying all kinds of creative things with instructional models. But our team, led by Dan and Viva, in being the architects of this program, focused on the priorities of consistency and stability for families, guaranteed like the times that you're going to see your kids, and pushing for more small group approach so that we can have that individual attention. I think that's worked for us.
Thank you very much. I move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any objections? Thank you all very much for coming. I know life's kinky for all of us these days, and anything you can do, anytime you can devote to Harlem Link is going to be very valuable to us, and I think probably very gratifying to you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks all. Much appreciated.
Thanks. Stay safe, everyone.
14 more days.
Get out.
Until what?
I'm going this weekend, Margaret. So
Get out.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
bye.